Hello.
All
Hi.
right. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Oh,
How are you this morning?
I am tired.
Yeah, I
We had
can
a,
relate to that.
we had a baby-driven wake up at 5,
Oh,
and then I've been building a cedar hot tub out in the back since 6. Day 7.
oh my goodness. Yeah. So you've been busy.
Yeah.
And
I liked your questions.
baby is 11 months old? Or
13.
13. Okay. So she just, oh my. I assume walking and all that good stuff.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
In
goodness.
that very funny way where you say something like, "Okay, time to change your diaper." She just pivots and just starts toddling away as fast as she can with both hands in the air.
Yeah. Mhm. So you got a chance to look at my questions or?
Yep.
Yeah, I have been, it's like whenever I'm listening to podcasts or anything, I've got like just a string of notes, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know which ones actually like might have some value in them, and so I thought I'd like put them out there and see what came from it. But I think the one about like the feminine taking responsibility and and again, and going back to the new agey coachy circles and how they are trying there's this idea of women like being able to manifest, and like kind of this very it's the new agey thing, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it and understand like, okay, there's I think some value there is some value in looking at the feminine archetypes and that type of thing, but how does this I'm not exactly sure what the question is that I'm trying to ask is, but
I think that sounds very much to the point, doesn't it?
yeah.
What's the phrase? The mystery?
Yeah.
It's the difference between a puzzle and a mystery.
Yeah.
So a couple of things come up for me as I was reading those. One is that I quite liked the fact that I felt no particular expertise in these questions. Like, there's nothing about those questions that are particularly mine to answer. I have a perspective. Obviously, everybody has a perspective on these sorts of things, but mine's not particularly singular, which is nice, because then what ends up happening is that we're having a dialogue. And in fact, we're having a dialogue more or less on your territory, because these are questions that are very much inside you. Like, these are questions that you're really chewing on. And I can almost feel the place they're coming from in looking at them. And so with this conversation, it becomes then is this more of it's a very strong, I think, a very strong possible example of Rule Omega, which is to say the role that I can serve is a role of trying to sense into the signal.
Okay.
And trying to separate upgrade signal and downgrade noise.
Yeah.
In what is ultimately your questions. Yeah. Which I think is great. That's in many ways that actually in some sense begins to move us in the direction of the question you just brought up.
I don't know, kind of like, I don't know which part is.
Well, the one aspect, this notion of the feminine, which of course is a coarse brush, right? It's just a gesture in a direction.
Mm-hmm. Wait, what word did you say? A core what?
Coarse brush, like a paintbrush, like a house painter's paintbrush, not a artist's paintbrush.
Yeah.
Like, you could put color on wood for sure, but you're not going to be doing a lot of detail with that, with the way the basic notion. And there's something even about this, like the fact that it is in the dialogue, it's in the conversations, in the relationship between us, that we can find the possibility of inquiring more deeply into the mystery.
Okay.
That is resonant with the essence of the thing that is often referred to as the feminine.
Okay.
So to the degree to which, I have an answer, like it's a very simple, like, where's the car? The car is there. Like, that's not that kind of thing.
No.
Very different.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, you're actually you're asking the question about it's recursive, the mode of inquiry, the mode of relationality that is appropriate and necessary to enter into the inquiry of the question you're asking is itself deeply complicit in, deeply intermingled with an expression of the question itself.
Okay. What's coming up for me, so I've like basically dove headfirst into John Vervaeke stuff in since we last talked, and the little bit that came up is the two pieces, the agent arena aspect of it, of what, like, trying to understand. I don't know exactly what's coming up. It's like that's what popped into my head as you were talking, was that piece. And that maybe just because that's what I've been inundating myself with in the last 2 weeks.
Okay. Well, to kind of play ping pong.
Yeah.
Unless you feel like there's more that you,
No,
is there more about that?
Yeah. No, that's.
The image that just popped in my head as you said that was a bronze yin yang, but where the yang, no, sorry, the yin was the actual bronze structure. So you actually had a circle, and you had a raised area that had a small dimple in it, and then you had a recessed area that was already there, and then I was pouring a white enamel into the recessed area to be the yang aspect. And so there was something about the agent arena relationship that triggered that sense, that image for me.
Okay. So again, going back to the coach new age circles, the one of the concepts that they're talking about a lot is this concept of manifestation, and especially like that women are, that the feminine is more this idea of a receptive, receiving, sort of manifesting, and like the rational part of me wants to go, what the hell are you talking about? But then there's also something that it touches that I'm like, I don't understand what it's touching, and trying to, and sort of my experience has been that as I formulate a question, the information seems to come. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So this is what I find in these kinds of domains.
Uh-huh.
Is it's actually, it can be, I think both can be done and is useful when you actually keep it quite simple.
Okay.
Like very practical. And the challenge I think that happens in the new age circles is they have an aesthetic attraction to the ungrounded, and so they tend to make things more, they orient towards magical thinking because it's more fun.
Yeah.
But many of the things that are being talked about can actually be grasped through a very grounded, like a very prosaic level.
Okay.
So let me see. So it's like, for example, there's a phrase that somebody said to me some time ago, which was like, energy flows where attention goes.
Yep.
Energy goes where attention, whatever, something like that.
Yeah. It's NLP. That's a big thing from the neuro-linguistic programming type.
Great.
Yeah.
So, for example, what just means to me in a very practical sense is, actually, if you don't mind, I'll use the extraordinarily practical, which is literally the project I was just working on. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on a project, building a cedar hot tub, which in many ways is like, that's about as concrete as you can. Well, it's not concrete, it's wood, but it's in the same, it's even more than concrete, even more
natural.
And one of the things that I notice is quite often I find myself, I would call it out of intuition or out of nowhere, having a flash of insight into how to solve a particular problem.
Okay.
So this is not, and by the way, now we're going to start getting into some very serious common stuff. Like this is there's a big misperception, I think, around how one goes about solving a problem. Almost never can you solve a problem by sitting down and thinking hard about the problem.
No.
It's almost never a valid approach.
Right.
Much more commonly, for example, is that you try to get a sense of the problem and then you leave it the fuck alone and go do something else, and pieces will begin to fall in. Okay, now that starts to feel a lot like this notion of manifestation.
Yeah.
Right? You're attending to the problem, but you're attending to the problem in some way other than focused attention. You're doing some other kind of attending. And this gets back to, this is also calls up that object arena. Like you're almost flowing into the shape. You're becoming something that becomes fluid enough to flow into the shape of the problem. Actually, it's like a liquid being poured into it until you've actually, you yourself in some way have become conformant to the shape of the problem. And then you have insight. Then you really, like, you've become in many ways it. And this is that yin yang, like the pouring the enamel into the shape. So just a very concrete example, I found that I had put two pieces of PVC together as part of a dry fit to like really make sure that everything was in there, because I got some tight spaces I have to move through. So I didn't want to, even measuring a 1/4 inch off might have been a problem. So I put it all together. And then when I was going just this morning to do the glue, or to glue it up, I couldn't get them apart. They had actually become bound, which apparently is a common problem. By the way, I'm not an expert in this thing.
No, I've worked with PVC before. Sometimes once you get it together, it does not want to come. It
doesn't come apart. So I worked it in a bunch of different ways. Like I twisted it. I put on gloves and twisted it. I banged on it with a mallet and a chisel. I had different kinds of wrenches trying on it. Nothing. I was like, oh man, I guess this is the time where I'm gonna have to go buy this exact same setup again. So, but I wasn't going to be bothered to get in the car and drive just then. So I went and did something else. Can't remember exactly what it was. And at some point in this thing where I was doing something else, out of nowhere, I just had this visual image of a pot of boiling water. I was like, I was like, wait a minute. If I put this in the boiling water, it would make the PVC soft enough that maybe it would unbind. Like, I didn't figure that out. There was no like logical series of, if then PVC is made of. There was like a different way of making sense of what was being of the problem. And it kind of, I had almost become loose. Funny, the metaphor is there. I had to become loose enough in myself, unbound enough in myself for this aspect of my larger capacity to kind of raise its hand, and through the visual channel, not even through like, whatever other ways, like, hey, have you thought about this? And it worked, by the way. Worked perfectly. It was incredible.
Awesome.
And so it was a massive victory, but it's I think a very nice concrete example of that basic thing, is that some part of me, like some part of my mind, some part of my brain, was puzzling over this challenge. And have you ever seen those videos of a slime mold searching a maze?
Yes. Right. I think I'm thinking of, I was thinking more like I've seen video games where you've got like slime that's moving through something and you're trying, you can kind of direct it and stuff.
So there's real videos, time lapse of the way a slime mold finds, like you've got a maze, like a standard maze. You got the slime mold on one end of it, and you've got a bunch of possible paths. And at the end of one of the paths, you have a pile of food. And the slime, if you watch what happens is the slime mold kind of like extends itself until it has filled more or less the whole space of the maze thinly. And then when it has found the path that leads to the food, it just evaporates the paths that aren't leading to food and upregulates the paths that are, and then bam, solution found.
Yeah.
By the way, maybe a little bit about how quantum computing works, but these are that's slime mold. That's very concrete, and yet there's something about that. So now let's turn that back to energy flows where attention goes. Or intention. I don't know. You probably know the phrase. What's the phrase?
Energy flows where attention goes. Is that what you're talking about?
Is that it? Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Okay.
Energy flows where attention goes. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you use that you said the word intention, because one thing that keeps going in my mind, one of my teachers who she spent the last 15 years working with ayahuasca, one of the things that she keeps saying is, it's not attention deficit disorder, it's intention deficit disorder. And that phrase keeps rattling around in my head. And so, but
yeah, that's nice, because I was getting confused in myself around that distinction. And it's something like, intention is a way of holding or focusing attention in some mystery, in some place, in some inquiry.
Yeah.
And if your intention is strong enough, then your attention will find itself pointed in that direction for long enough. And this, then we're sort of close the loop on this thing, where, if I've got I had the problem of the bound PVC, but I could have any number of problems. I might have a problem like, how do I navigate a particularly sticky issue in a relationship, right? That's the kind of thing that has that shape, like it's a very complex shape. And if I just kind of like worry about it, I'm not going to get there. That's like sitting down and thinking really hard.
Yeah.
But if I have a sense of like, okay, this is important to me, it's meaningful, I will have the whole of myself attend to it, which is to say, that will be the arena. I will become the agent, and I will begin to conform to the arena. I will flow into it, and I will, in some sense, become the shape of it. And I'll just sort of keep feeling and moving and shifting until I've so fully become in myself, not harmonious. What's the right term? It's like verisimilitude with it, that then a synthetic integration, which they might call intuition, of a very large, diverse set of characteristics, the kind of thing that you couldn't do well or possibly at all analytically, can then happen. And then you will come to a conclusion. You will come to an insight, like, okay, here's the possibility. Does that make sense?
I'm going to have to watch that a couple of times to digest all of it. So I'm glad we're recording this. But what came up as you were talking about that is tying it back to the original question of the feminine taking responsibility. And what came in was, I was just watching the episode of John's series where he's talking about I have the note right here. The core of wisdom is knowing what is in our control and what is not in our control. And then I wrote next to it the Serenity Prayer, because I'm in the recovery community. And so, and the deep sense of panic that a lot of women experience, of letting go of control, of I don't know what's happening, like I don't know how to make this I don't know what the words are, how to make this relationship into what I want it to be. And the being able to sit within their own discomfort for that work to happen in the background.
Yeah.
Of, I don't know what the answer is to this problem. There's a relationship issue I'm dealing with right now where, like, I finally learned how to, okay, you're doing your thing, I got to let you do your thing and not try and force it.
Right.
Yeah. And there's, I think I don't think it's just women. I think there is this, this confusion about what we have control over. And if I worry, that if I worry about it enough, then that's an indication that I care. And then
yeah,
I think especially for women, it's, well, I worry because I care. Like, because I don't know, I'm not comfortable enough in myself to know, well, yes, I care, so I have to prove it by worrying.
What's that term? There's a term, is it called a semaphore? There's like a, neurologically, women have a faster rate of some kind of neurological clock, basically, that says check for threats. Like check for, I don't know if there's a term for it.
check for relationship threats. Like
in general.
yeah.
Yeah. But like with a child, you're like, check and make sure the kid's okay.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's a cycle where that check-in happens. So I can imagine that would be, so if you combine those two things, right? If you combine a tighter rate of basically check for particular qualities of threat. I mean, as you say, it may be in the relationship domain or among humans that you're in relationship with, not so much like, I don't know, cars driving down the street.
It may have originated with other things, snakes, whatever might be attacking baby, as those things are no longer
right.
As those are no longer a threat, it has been redirected into every manner of relationship.
Everything. Yeah. Yeah. So this is we haven't talked about this. I don't know if I've ever talked about this. I don't know if it's common knowledge, if it's just something that I've thought about, but so for example, this notion of panic, I've read this in enough places. I have a reason to believe that what I'm about to say is true enough to be useful.
Okay.
And I think if you do it neurologically, it again helps to ground it. So it's basically the relationship between the limbic system and the cortical system. So you have a t equals 0 first. The first thing that happens is the limbic system is going to have some kind of response. So perception is coming in. Very quickly, the limbic system is going to be producing some kind of evaluation, some response to that perception. So let's say that is a response of alarm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So alarm is the limbic system is sensing some possibility that there is some kind of threat, some kind of harm or danger, and it is beginning to shift the disposition of the body into an arousal to be able to respond to alarm, whether that's to run away or to scream or to fight or whatever happens. It's beginning that process to say, hey, threat assessment, something's going on. Now, here's the thing. That's old stuff. Like that's ancient neurological material.
Mm-hmm.
You get this other stuff. Well, I mean, here and here,
mm-hmm.
That's much newer. It's tapping into that though. It's getting that signal. And so your cortex and your neocortex are getting a signal of alarm. And it's going, okay, well, what is it? That's basically the way it works. Like, okay, what's the alarm? What is it? Now, if
and
the
you
way
can't find it,
and if it's not obvious, then you will begin to possibly make up a story, and that's where you get in trouble, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't actually ground the alarm, if the alarm is like, oh, there's a snake, okay, that's done, there, got it, problem solved. If it's actually you feel alarm and you don't have any idea of what it is, if you don't see something that collapses it quickly, then you might make up a story. And now when you're making up a story, you're in some sense pulling this fabric of narrative, much of which is, well, let's see, some portion of it is going to be from your own life. Some portion of it's going to be things that other people have given you.
If you've watched enough Criminal Minds or Law and Order Special Victims Unit, it's going to really mess with you.
It'll mess with you, right? And in your own life, you're going to have a whole bunch of things that are potentially bad mappings because you had, as you were creating your own personal narrative, you're loading reality with whatever your particularities happen to be, and you may have made some bad mappings, right? You may have actually, when you were a kid, a dog may have attacked you. And so you've just bound dog to very, very scary, mm-hmm. when it's not necessarily a good mapping. Right? Yeah. And as you say, some sizable fraction of narrative that you're absorbing from the outside world is going to include stuff that is wise, but it's also going to include stuff that is unwise, and it's also going to include stuff that is deliberately manipulative.
What popped into my head was, again, going back to John, of pulling apart the event and the meaning.
Yeah.
Being able to pull those pieces apart.
And have some spaciousness in between them.
Yeah.
This prevents that loop from happening. If you don't do that, if they're very bound, then what will happen is the event occurs, the limbic systems in this case sort of just says alarm, then the meaning is made, shoo, the narrative tries to close it. Oh, it is fill in the blank, doesn't matter. Now here's the trick. There's a feedback loop though. If you have a narrative in your head that says there's a bad guy getting ready to attack me, that narrative actually comes back down and the limbic system's like, shit, alarm. So you get a feedback loop, but now alarm has gone up. But since now your level of alarm has gone up, your neocortex is like, my story must be true. It just got a signal from its own sensing system that oh my gosh, so you get this, so the narrative gets more intensely validated, which then stimulates the alarm response, which then reinforces the narrative, and you get a panic attack.
Yeah. No.
So panic is that. Panic is when you don't have enough space. There's a very big difference between alarm or alert and panic. And it's precisely when there's not enough space between event and meaning to allow the body to just respond in a rate that works with the way that things like the endocrine system operates at a much slower pace than neurons.
Yeah.
So once you've dumped a bunch of adrenaline and cortisol into your body, it's in there for a while.
What came up partway through that was going back. I'm going to look up this semaphore, but with the women having a faster rate, being the physically smaller of the species, having, the threat that men were I'm going to put this out there, and then you can give me a different, men are no longer dealing with the physical threat in the same way that women are, in the sense, women are not in danger, but there's a perception, but there can be a perception, like when my husband's a big guy, so when he raises his voice, it's physically, if he raises his voice out of frustration or whatever, my alarm system goes into massive overdrive, because I am, I know that I'm safe, but that doesn't mean that my system doesn't, I also have conditioning of, I had a very large stepdad who did the same thing, got very big and very loud. And so, but that creating this, but putting the space between the event and the meaning, or the analogy that's been coming up for me the metaphor that's been coming up for me is being able to see the glasses that I have on. That I'm looking at this event through a particular pair of glasses, and being able to recognize, okay, that's the pair of glasses that I'm looking at this through, that is automatically attaching this meaning to this event. I don't know if that makes sense, or did we get frozen? Uh-oh. Hello? Did I lose you? Hello? Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
All right, so yeah.
So tying that back to the feminine taking responsibility, if it is true that we have that some aspect of our neurology is causing us to be more aware of threat, that it would make sense why the number of women who are on antidepressant or anti-anxiety medications is higher than.
I'm going to give you a double whammy. So there's a lot of things going on here. Maybe a quadruple or quintuple whammy. So one of the things that I think is the case in that notion of the feminine must take responsibility is the degree to which women are in fact using the masculine rather than the feminine to navigate, for example, threat and opportunity. And that creates a huge noise, a lot of dissonance. And a piece of that is also So here's I think a big part of the distinction of where those two modalities, the masculine and the feminine, would show up. To the degree to which you are running narrative as a primary way of making choices, I would characterize that as being more available in the masculine, a more masculine modality. So if
Can
you
you
have,
can you give me just a little bit more of what you mean by running narrative?
yeah, sure. What should I eat today? Well, the USDA has told me that I should be eating 10 grams of wheat. So you have a choice. How do I make a choice? And the way that you go about making the choice is you look for a story that tells the answer to the question. You look for some kind of existing framework that takes the question and provides an answer, a schema.
Okay. Yeah.
Generally speaking, you're looking for a schema. You'll be looking for one that was produced by somebody else, but not always. Sometimes you're running your own narratives. So that's one way of doing it, right? Like what should I eat? And one way of doing it is to say, okay, well, I've got a chart, and the chart indicates how many calories I've taken in, and what nutrition I've had, and what's appropriate nutrition according to these books, and you try to place your spot in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
For me, what comes up is like, one of the things I've always thought of is like, I've lived my life according to a huge set of rules that I took in from other people and didn't have a sense of what I thought versus this set of rules that I was supposed to live by.
That's precisely it. That's exactly it. And so to kind of extend and then come back, an alternative approach would be, what should I eat right now? The answer would be, well, what do I want?
Yeah.
And more importantly, what do I need? And is there a way for you to actually get to what you need by feeling it, rather than looking for an answer from an authority or a structure or a schema from the outside, the set of rules?
Yeah.
And I would say that's more in the direction of the feminine, right? So to develop a capacity, to develop a sensitivity and a sense of nuance, and to tune yourself, like, so simultaneous, it's a capacity. It's not, a baby does not instantaneously know exactly what's right, but a baby definitely doesn't get in the way. It doesn't have stories. But
Right.
as you grow up, if you experience things and you kind of, well, okay, that works, and then you try this, like, oh, that was nice, but you kind of embody the learning. The learning is held deeply in your whole self, not just in a cognitive frame. Then when the question arises, your response is going to be kind of an inquiry into yourself. You'll ask yourself, what seems to be the thing right now?
Yeah.
And just like my melting the PVC or boiling the PVC, there will be some response, and that response will come up in a way that isn't analytical. Like, you're not doing it in that way. Now, if you kind of turn the clock back to the prior to the agricultural era, for example, prior to literacy, prior to writing, and then go back as far as you want after that. So, over 25,000, 50,000 years ago and back, the human female body, is almost certainly the most sensitive and exquisitely tuned instrument for making sense of the environment that has ever been created. And a big part of that has to do with two things. On the one hand, the human vehicle, the human body, has this massive capacity for perception and sense making. And on the other hand, the cost of birthing and nurturing a child is extraordinary, right? Way off the charts in terms of nature. Right? It's nuts in terms of how hard it is.
Yeah.
So the human female body, which is primarily what carries that cost, will have put evolutionarily a huge amount of the capacity of the human vehicle to perceive whether or not the environment is one that is well suited for right now carrying that cost. Like, is there food? Is there water? Does the temperature seem right? Does it seem like there's rain? Are we surrounded by hostile animals? Is the tribe hanging together? Is my grandmother healthy? Are my other kids, like, all this shit, right? It's a lot. It's complexity in its very essence. And that complexity has to be integrated into an answer that has incredibly intense consequences. So that's a super powerful instrument, right? The instrument that is selected by evolution over millions and millions of years to get that answer right is fucking intense. Now, when we then spend 30,000 years in civilization training people to run narrative as opposed to running that instrument, I can see why women might have some anxiety, because when you have lost connection with that instrument's not going away. Like all that information is bubbling up constantly, right? Your body is constantly perceiving everything in its environment, which is of course becoming increasingly incomprehensible. You know, a car, we've had cars for what, 150 years?
Yeah.
So there's like cars buzzing by and your body's like, I don't know what that is. It seems like it smells bad. It's noisy. It's, you know, potential threat. So your body's churning all of this stuff to give you a sense of how to make choices in your environment. And you spent from probably 3 or 4, depending on when your parents began to intervene in terms of trying to train you. Certainly 5 or 6 if you went into any part of the educational system.
Yeah.
Training yourself not to have any capacity to perceive those signals, and instead to focus all of your energy and attention on how to make choices on the basis of running narrative. This is that thinking, not thinking distinction, but at its most intense break. So if you're in that kind of a body, you're going to be, it would be shocking to me if you weren't feeling intense anxiety and confusion quite often, because it's like the visual image is like a, something on the fritz.
Mm-hmm.
Energy, lots of energy is flowing through the wire, but the wire is throwing sparks all over the place.
Just as a little bit of background on me, 6 years ago, I came off a whole lot of psych meds. And so it basically triggered an existential crisis. I mean, like a bunch of things that all, sent me down the path of like, falling down very deep into a hole and like figuring out, like there was, all of a sudden I was receiving so much information. My nervous system was overloaded. It felt like I was plugged into a light socket 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for about 1.5 years before I figured out how to calm it down a little bit. So what you're describing, and one of the things that my husband and I talk about is if shit goes to hell in a handbasket, one of the things that's going to happen is of the medicine, of the psychiatric meds, that distribution of psychiatric meds that is suppressing all of that is going to get interrupted, and you're going to have a massive system, a situation of like a huge emotional triage that you're trying to deal with. And how to, and
oh boy, bad place to be.
My experience of what happened when I came off that, essentially what I experienced was a kernel panic. I experienced a blue screen of death, and my system completely rebooted. And it has been like relearning to be a human being. Like that's what what the process has been like, of like, oh my God, what is all of this stuff coming at me? But it was like in the process of trying to exist in the world, and like I was barely I was like in a state of barely existing in the world, because I was having to I had to relearn how to think. I've had to relearn how to talk in with a whole different set of language. I'm like, oh wait a minute, everything I thought I knew, like it like doesn't make sense anymore, and trying to relearn how to do that. And so how do you, like, I've been trying to figure out, okay, I've just sort of did it intuitively, but how do you help someone who's going through that? Like, what are the processes? How do you retrain? How do you relearn how to be a person when everything you knew is sort of no longer exists? And I feel like that's a big piece of what people are going to go through in order to be able to transition from game A to game B.
Well, hopefully not all of them as intense as that, but yeah, for sure, to some extent. So that's just a really nice example of turning it up to 11.
Yeah.
But from 0 to 11, everybody's going to go through that for sure. Well, maybe a small number of people won't.
Did you see the meme in the Game B Facebook community yesterday that said, if you're trying to transition from game A to game B and you haven't experienced an existential crisis, then you've got a problem.
Or look out.
Yeah.
Because it's coming. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so in some sense, it's like, and there's some wisdom to that, which is say, okay, well, if you're going to be experiencing an existential crisis, at least you can try to figure out how to set yourself up so that it's least likely to create havoc.
Right. Because for me, I had no idea what was happening. Like it was, and so how can you, like, I think that's part of one of the questions that I'm answering is how do you help someone through that? Because a big part of, for me, what it was realizing that at the foundation of my belief system was an intense self-hatred.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you turn that? How do you change that? And there's someone that I'm working with, like, who has that same, like, a lot of women have this deep, just profound level of self-hatred that everything that they look at the world through, and that manifests itself in paranoia, in the anxiety, in all of these pieces. And how do you take responsibility for that?
Boom. All right. Well, that's that. So this notion of the feminine needs to take responsibility has this bizarre implication that T equals 0. The very first thing is that you need to learn to love yourself.
Yeah.
Like, to take responsibility means first and foremost to truly, authentically, really, for sure, all the way, stop living in intense self-hatred and begin living in real self-love. And that's that. Like, now you ask the question, how? But first we could begin with what? That?
Yeah.
How? Okay. It's funny. So I want to stay very practical to begin with, because there's you could clear a lot of brush first. For example, so let's say you're on a bunch of psych meds, and you've decided that it's time to get off the psych meds. And let's say also you're a pilot flying airplanes. Choosing the day that you're flying a flight from, let's say, San Francisco to Sydney as the pilot, as the day that you begin the process of getting off your psych meds,
probably not a
bad choice, right? Yeah. Bad choice. And we can use that as a work back. Yeah. It's, again, like, I'm just trying to clear out the brush.
Yeah. You're
going to need space. You're going to need time. You're going to need space for an existential crisis. And as you said, 1.5 to 2 years is probably a pretty good frame. It's the metaphor of, if you got hit by a car and you were paralyzed and they had surgery, but you had to relearn how to walk, you create space and time.
Yeah.
That's it. So seriously, like, if you can find a way, and I don't mean like at all, I don't mean this in the least bit, what's the right term? Blasé. If you and your partner and or family can find a way to create space where you can quit your job, where you can be not in cities, where you're surrounded by difficulty having to navigate, where you can actually become very simple. And you can say, okay, I'm going to have 2 years of space where this task of relearning how to be a human is the only thing I've got on my plate. If you've got kids, that's much harder to deal with.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, like that, even there, just thinking about, okay, how do I get support? Do I find ways to get more people? I'm focusing all my energy now on making this possibility space at least as rich and robust as it can be. So that's one, right? Try to set yourself up to win by creating a context that is the most available to you are relearning human from ground up.
Yeah.
Right? And that is many people don't do that. So many people embark on that journey still trying to maintain 98% of their life.
Yeah.
Which is really problematic, because then what ends up happening is, even if they're successful, they'll have an insight that destroys a whole part of their life because they begin to realize that it's not even who they are.
Yeah.
They'll get divorced, for example.
The things that you are describing are exactly what my experience, was, because I did not have the support or I had maybe a fraction of it, of what I actually needed. And so, yeah.
So that's one, right? So that's very difficult to do, but always good advice, a good approach. Always take that. And I mean very specifically, like, you know how this happens all the time. Many things feel impossible, but if you actually are forced to do them, it turns out they're not as impossible as they seem.
Yeah.
And so if you actually like, fuck it, I'm really going to focus on making this possible, it'll turn out that it'll be a lot more flexibility than you thought. So there's that big gap between what's easy and what's impossible. And the hard is hard, but it's not impossible. So that's that. So then you get the next one, which is, okay.
That actually, that piece is, I think, actually a huge piece.
It's huge, yeah.
Was that that there were things that this is impossible. It is impossible for me to quit my job. It is impossible for me to do these things. And eventually it got to the point where it was like, no, you don't have a choice. You're
right.
going to, like, for whatever reason, I got shoved down this thing that I didn't necessarily intend to do. And the terror that was coming from was, I'm in an impossible situation. And because of all of the limiting beliefs I had about what was possible, because that hard, what seemed impossible. And so
hard loves to pull impossible over the top.
Yeah.
And then what ends up happening is that then what it does, hard goes, this is impossible. And that over there is easy. When in fact, what's actually easy is totally unsustainable. So you end up being completely inverted in terms of choice making.
Yeah.
Continue doing all the things you're doing. Don't change anything. That's easy. You can keep going forward. Oh, wait, hold on. Except it's completely unsustainable and it can't possibly work.
And I want to bring in that part of, I think, what allowed me to get through this was being in recovery community. And there's psychotechnologies that they have, tools.
Yes.
The Serenity Prayer, like simple, very, very simple things of turning it over. It's like, I don't know how to solve this problem. God, take that. And for me, mine was time, take this. Cause I can't, there's nothing I can do, like my mind was just spinning and here, time, take this because I can't handle it. So that turning it over, training your brain to turn things over and over again. Like, yeah, that helped navigate that hard that seems impossible.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny. There's a gentleman, Stuart Brand. When I was first working on the Game B stuff back in, I guess, 2011, he recommended the recovery community as having some of the most powerful, proven, and call it easy. Like you can use them.
Yeah.
Psychotechnologies. He didn't use that exact term. Full stop.
Yeah.
Like research those guys. And yes, completely. You could do the same thing also in trauma therapy, particularly physical trauma therapy. Again, like if you were paralyzed from the waist down and you got surgery and you're gonna have to relearn how to walk, they have the same, very similar set of psychotechnologies. Surrender. You can't go any faster than you can go, so just give up on everything that isn't actually right in front of you.
Yes.
So exactly, serenity, which is to be able to orient yourself fully into that which you actually can, and to completely let go of that which you can't. I mean, that's actually the best approach to everything, as far as I can tell.
Yes.
Anyway, so there's a long list of things that are essentially psychotechnologies, and you can also be, if you take those two poles, like the pole of clearing out the weeds and the pole of the set of psychotechnologies, and kind of move them together, the one in the center is your relationships. If you are in toxic relationships, then that's going to destroy anything you're trying to do. Resolving those toxic relationships is part of your work.
Yes.
So it's right in the center.
And that, bringing that back to the feminine taking responsibility, there is a ton of stuff where women are pointing the finger and saying, you're a narcissist, you're whatever, pointing the finger at the men being responsible for the problems in the relationships that are happening. And my experience was, I had, when I pointed the finger, this was a simple one. When you point the finger at someone else, there's three fingers pointing back at you. What is it that how did I participate in creating this toxicity? Because a huge amount of what's happening is, oh, the men over there, they're toxic, so I'm going to get away from them. And then women are like surrounding each other and saying, oh, we've recovered from this toxic relationship. I'm in recovery from this toxic relationship, but not actually looking at at their part in the toxicity that created it.
Yeah. In fact, and sometimes reinforcing it.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of these things where, yes, there are probably things in the other that are problematic, right? For sure.
Yeah.
Everybody's fucked up in many deep and intense ways.
Yes.
But that's not your thing, right? Your responsibility is to figure out how to tune yourself and repair the stuff in you. And as you said, the very beginning is to get out of self-hatred and get into the cycle of self-love. So in that case, for example, you might say, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this relationship, which is hard, right? It creates a lot of noise in my life. And I'm going to put it into the clearing out the weeds, which is I'm just going to take a break from it. I'm not going to assess it. I'm not going to judge it. I'm not going to make meaning out of it. I'm just going to create space away from it so I can have enough space to do what I need to do. And then, by the way, once I've actually healed some stuff in me, I'll get perspective on it. And it may be like, oh, okay, now that I've got perspective on it, I can move the relationship back into a more right place.
It's really interesting to hear you describing all of these things, because it is exactly what in many ways, exactly what I did. I just didn't know that that's what I was doing. Like,
well, this is my first person experience as well.
You are absolutely like describing, you helping clear away the noise of like, I walked through it, but I didn't know what I was doing. And so you're now feeding back of, oh yeah, that's what I did.
Well, so if we want to take this up, we can also do the as above, so below, because everything that's being said right now, if you take the individual human and replace the individual human with the human family, that's it's exactly the same. I don't mean like it's similar. It's exactly the same. Like things like, we need to do a comprehensive reboot of our socio-technologies of how we operate the economy. That's impossible. No, it's hard.
Yes.
What's currently happening is unsustainable. It's easy to close our eyes to it, but if we actually look at it, it's unsustainable. It's not what we're talking about. It's not impossible. It's merely hard. Oh, and by the way, we could do the third piece. The first is the individual going through this work, which I can now just say this is to become sovereign.
Yeah.
The second is the communal, the world, people in different groups, learning how to do the same thing as groups. And then the third is the relationship between those two. Right? As you have gone through the process that you've gone through, your capacity to participate in groups that are themselves available to go through that process as groups is increasing.
Yes.
Both in terms of you're now more functional, and in terms of you actually built wisdom, real wisdom and experience and insight that is yours, that you own personally, not narratives that came from somewhere else, but real lived experience that you can bind to life, that you can then bring into conversations and into possibilities and relationships. And like that's, in some sense, that's the whole story.
The one of the pieces, and this was one of the parts that was, I think, made things a lot harder on me than it needed to be, is that part of what I did was, so because I was part of recovery community, that's letting go of mind altering substances. And part of what I discovered that I needed was, there were certain psychedelic experiences that I needed as part of that it was not until about 6 months ago that I really started to embody self-love through the experience of MDMA.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That until I had the actual lived experience of, oh, this is what that feels like.
Right. Got it.
I didn't know what I was moving towards. And like, I have people who, after 20 years of meditation, get that feeling. But when you're when you're suicidal and your brain keeps going to that place of, my only option is to die, like the idea of putting up with that for another 15 or 20 years until your system can transition to that. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so, and getting that embodied experience of, oh, this is what it feels like to have all of my self-hatred frame of reference moved, like I can take it and move it away, set it aside for a few hours to have that embodied experience. Then when it comes back, it's going, okay, this is the experience, okay, this is your experience of the frames coming back online, and there's more space from it, and there's a feeling, there's an actual felt sense that I can call on, that I was like frantically trying to find for years, that I couldn't. I was like, self-love, what the hell is that?
Right.
So it's this, interesting piece, is like all of the psychotechnologies from recovery were exactly what I needed. But in being part of that community, it was, you can't go over here either. And
right.
needing to make the decision of, I need to go over here as well.
Which is great. Like that's that notion of, in the recovery community, it feels like there's a sense of a narrative.
Yeah, there is.
And there's you need to run our narrative. We're going to give you a bunch of cool tools, and our narrative is good because it has these tools, but you need to run our narrative. And the reality is that each individual must become increasingly sovereign. You've got responsibility for yourself. And sometimes you can't take responsibility for yourself. You're not up to where you are, but nonetheless, you cannot ever really live life running somebody else's narrative. So you'll have to, at some point, come to making the choices of exactly what you need. And it's just like, like that example of what should I eat right now?
Yeah.
What do I need right now? And in your body, it's like, I need a felt sense of this fucking thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to violate the narrative. I'm going to transgress that religion, and I'm going to do what feels to me to be the right thing. And it's a choice that I'm making from what myself is telling me.
Yes.
And then we can be careful. We could just say, hey, there's a very big difference between going to the mountaintop once to see what it looks like from the top of the mountaintop and knowing that there is one.
Yeah.
And every weekend taking the elevator to the mountaintop and calling yourself a mountain climber. Those are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And it's okay. We can make that distinction.
Yeah. That there is definitely that distinction. There was there's one other piece that one other question that I put, that I want to be respectful of your time, so I don't know when you need to hop off, but you, in the conversation that you were having with John Vervaeke, you talked about if the person that you need to have a conversation with is a 7-year-old girl in Peru because she has whatever piece of information you need, now I'm realizing I have 2 questions, but there's a humility that is sorely lacking in most of our culture. Mm-hmm. And the experience as a person in a feminine body is that a lot of times there is, if you aren't this strongly rational, logical, the masculine typically ignores you. And so that, there's this, so how can women be part of this, of like, okay, there's a humility that is needed in a significant portion of the, and I'm generalizing, and it's not exclusively men and it's not exclusively women, it's just a generalization. How do we, one of the problems I have is I can't demand someone listen to me without very heavily going into that strong masculine place of like, you must listen, I'm demanding that you listen to me, but knowing that I have a piece of the puzzle, and how does that, and I don't know if that question makes sense. I'm sort of talking in circles and there's a lot of noise in it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of different aspects of sense there. So let's see. So one of the things that rang for me very cleanly was, you cannot demand that someone listen to you full stop.
Yeah.
Right? You can make sure that somebody hears what you're saying, in the sense that the sound will hit their ears. But you cannot in the least bit cause them to listen to you. To listen is a receptive thing. One must be receptive to listen, to hear. So it's more like, how do you invite listening? How do you invite listening into the world more and more fully? And you also use the word humility, which I think is very profound. There was one other thing that was coming up in the context of humility, which is, curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. And
Observation without judgment.
yeah, one of the things I was noticing is, in the context of the male world. So, and there's of course a difference. You may or may not have first person experience of it, but if you have a group of, say, like 6 or 7 men and there's no women there, and then a woman shows up, there's a shift, something happens. So I'm talking about in the context of the male world.
Yeah.
There's a problem, which is not entirely problematic, but it's a problematic because it's too much, which is, to be curious, to have humility, can also be perceived as weak. Right? To know, to have expertise and competence and knowledge and information, and to be able to deploy it effectively, is to be strong. And in the male hierarchy, one of the things you're looking for is to find out who is strong, and that person now is the leader of that hierarchy. And there's value to that, right? If you're doing something that has a significant amount of well understood, like with my hot tub, right? I'm actually hiring an electrician to do the last bit. Like, I am not fucking doing that myself, because that's dangerous. So that's a place where
water and electricity, not good.
Not that those two things don't mix well in an amateur. So my curiosity, my humility actually is very much in play. Truly be humble, be aware of that. But you're speaking to a deeper sense, which I think is very important, which is, sorry, I needed to bring that up to bring up there's almost a weaponization of that becomes possible. And I talked about this a little bit in the context of thinking and not thinking, that one of the moves of not thinking is the ability to use that weaponization of certainty, like in debate, to say like the cutting remark, or to say just like to get the, what do you call it? What is the phrase? To own someone in dialogue.
Yeah.
Like all debate in general is all of that modality. And everything about that is too much in our current culture. So moving back, how do we invite humility? How do you invite curiosity? Which of course then is, how do you invite listening? Which by the way is also, how do you invite maturity? Because in some sense, all we're really talking about is just maturity. Growing up. How do you invite someone to grow up? My sense is that first and foremost is you have to be very committed yourself to embodying that, to do those kinds of things, to be humble, to truly be humble, to truly be curious, to truly listen. And then to me, it feels almost like an exercise in parenting. Parenting is something I have some experience in, and I also use it as a metaphor. So, if you're in relationship with a 1-year-old, and the 1-year-old is screaming about something that's upsetting them, one of the right things is empathy. And here, I mean empathy in a very strong sense, that philosophical sense. I don't mean it in the sense of, I'll tell you what I mean by it. What I mean by it is listening very deeply to where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that meaning assuming that they are awesome. Like empathy doesn't at all mean valorizing where they're coming from. It means listening very deeply to where they're coming from, in all of its richness, in all of the pain and beauty of any human experience. And then in that, using that capacity to listen so deeply to find the thing that is the very particular place that is oh shit. You said it so well earlier. Was it like in tone? You used the word tone somewhere earlier?
I'm not sure. What's coming up as you say that is hearing where their pain is coming from, hearing where their understanding that their perspective, while maybe I don't agree with it, it is their perspective, and I can't make that wrong. And like with a child,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
hearing that I am in pain. And with a child, actually this is with a child, you understand that they don't understand why they're in pain. With an
Yes.
adult, it's harder, especially with and again, a generalization, that I am in pain and I don't know why. And the only thing I have is this narrative, is this story that you're causing it.
Sure.
And being able to not be invested in that, what that other person is, the story that they're telling, again, separating the event from the meaning, and hearing the pain over the story, over the narrative, hearing the emotion, yeah.
I would even go deeper than the pain. I would actually go to the self, the whole self, of which pain is part of it.
Yeah.
Because what's being invited, the real invitation in any encounter is, what is the highest possibility of this relationship? And so coming with no real agenda, this goes back to humility. If in yourself you're coming with humility, if in yourself you're coming with curiosity, and you're coming with listening, then in any moment you don't have a preconceived notion of what's supposed to be happening, right? You're not trying to convince or to tell or share anything. You're attempting to discover, and we'll be surprised every time to discover what is really the possibility that this relationship is calling for. So if you listen into the other and really get a sense of their self, and I don't mean like in your mind know them, I mean like feel it, like that felt feeling, that felt sense of self-love that you were talking about with MDMA.
What true empathy is.
True empathy. That's what I was trying, exactly. True empathy.
Of true empathy, of having a real 3D map of that person inside me. Like,
yes.
What is my, like, can I put myself in their shoes? What is, Tara Brach, I'm a huge fan. She's helped me with a ton of stuff, is like, what is life like for you? What is your experience? And being able to have that internal map of them that's so vivid and so real that there is no way, like, it feels like it's a part of me, that there's no way I could attack them because of their,
and this is why self-love is the starting point. Because if you hate yourself, then the more you know them, the more you can hate them too. You're just making them part of the object that is going to be the object of hate. If you have self-love, if you have the capacity to truly feel that feeling of love for yourself, then as you imbibe them into you, that care that you have will intrinsically include now the whole, which is including both of you, right? Then it's seeking, what is the thing? What is being called for in this possibility? And it could be anything. It could be anything at all. There is no constraint. There's no agenda. There's no needing for it to be any given thing.
There's no needing for it to be any given thing. Yeah. And the word, again, the new agey circles, what are we co-creating?
Yeah. What are we co-creating?
Yeah. What are we, and maybe it's, in one circumstance, it's actually creating something, in another, it's being in dialogue and figuring out, like, figuring out what's signal and what's noise. And
now we're here. So now again, this instrument, this capacity to perceive and make choices on the basis of increasingly subtle felt sense in yourself, which is, by the way, supported by knowing stuff, right? Knowledge and experience in life.
Yeah.
How do I say this? This does not mean being open to everything, right? It means perceiving and separating signal from noise. And a lot of stuff is noise, right? So if, for example, your husband is constantly coming home and is in a bad mood and angry and raising his voice, what is called for in the relationship is supporting him and finding a way to stop fucking doing that.
Yeah. That's a problem we solved, that we've gotten through, which is good. Yeah.
The thing that came up for me is the characteristic flakiness of millennials and new age millennials, even more so.
Yes.
Which is what are we co-creating together? And then no capacity to commit to something, no capacity to have intention that has got enough strength to it to actually allow this manifestation to actually occur. And that's just, again, a built capacity. Once you've built the capacity to hold intention more fully, then you can really start co-creating real things, not just ephemera.
So then that leads actually into the last question that I had, which is, okay, yes, I work with women in relationships because I learned how to navigate an incredibly dysfunctional, toxic relationship, and we've actually come out the other side.
That is incredible. So,
and but like the example I had yesterday is, someone who doesn't know what the difference is between objective and subjective. You had like there are, yeah, I am absolutely in love with John's series. I mean, it's amazing. I love it. And the what popped into my head is Daniel's thing when sense making of don't simplify things, don't make things so bite-sized that people can't we don't need to make things into the simplified way, that into something that's incredibly simple. But how do you go from someone who doesn't know the difference between objective and subjective to being able to watch something like John's series on the awakening from the meaning crisis? Like, how do you move?
Right.
Like that's a huge difference. And interestingly, I don't see it as as something that's impossible. It's just hard. Like, but how do you?
In some cases, it may not be necessary.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, like I'm not going to be doing the last bit of electrical work on this hot tub.
Okay.
There's some other human being in this human family for whom that is their vocation. And the right relationship is actually, I give them money, they do the work, and that's done deal. We're all very happy.
Yeah.
There are some people for whom what John Vervaeke is doing is precisely what they need right now.
Yeah.
There are some people where it's going to be the end point of some developmental growth that they go through. There are some people for whom it is irrelevant, and they will be relating with whatever else is happening in between. Right? So you seem to be attending to what John's doing. That means that you ultimately are in a place to either orient certain people towards it on their own basis, if it feels like that's the right thing, or to provide what aspect of that you've actually imbibed yourself to them and potentially point them to other people who have that to give. And so we're kind of like, we're all helping each other is a vast thing. It's not necessary that everything and everybody be connected. It's actually crucial that not be the case.
No, that makes sense. And then in the conversation that you and John had, you said, when you guys were talking about the religion that is not a religion, again, I referenced one of my teachers who has been, been working with ayahuasca for an extended period of time. She is somebody who is like able to like sit with people when they are having, psychosis in these, things. And, she's just able to do that. And the warning or the piece that John talks about of not engaging with these without a wisdom tradition. And you guys talked about the religion that's not a religion, but it's more like it's creating a wisdom tradition than.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Then and you referenced that.
That's a great way of putting it. Thank you.
Yeah, that it's a wisdom tradition. It's not a religion. And so what, I pointed my teacher towards John's series, and she's going to be watching that, and I can foresee that I'm part of whatever, she and I have been working together for several years, and I can see there's something that's going to be created as part of that. And how, and it's not just one wisdom tradition. Like there's, there I assume there's lots of them that are going to be created. And but there's, and maybe John gets into this of, okay, what are what is the question that I'm asking? What are the features? What are the aspects? What are the things that can potentially, actually, I think this is more the question is, what are the pieces to be aware of that can potentially be missed when this is emerging, to pay attention to, what are the pieces to pay attention to as this is emerging? Because it's not something that's being created, it's something that's emerging.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the pieces that, what are the ways that things can be, what are the pieces that can be overlooked, that like don't forget about this piece. Pay attention. What are the pieces to pay attention to as it's emerging? And there's a very specific piece that with my teacher, she has been trained, in South American tradition, but one of her teachers very specifically said, I don't envy you being an American, because you are dealing with a lot of neuroses that,
Yeah.
and there is a tradition that is needing to emerge that is uniquely American, because a lot of people can't necessarily relate to a Peruvian, shaman. And so we have this new thing that is, or maybe it's more a Western tradition, I'm not sure. That was a lot. Maybe you got, and hopefully you got some signal out of that noise.
Uh-huh. Well, okay. So the first thing that came up for me was, that's a very good question. And what I would recommend is that we not try to answer that question right now, because we don't have time, and rather perhaps we have another conversation focusing on that question. And what I really would appreciate is if you do the same thing that you did last time, which is inquire into that deeply, and then maybe if something comes up as subsidiary questions or questions that are in that space, put them in an email so that I can digest it.
Yeah.
The second thing that came up was, thank God that the women are starting to show up in force, because this kind of question is the kind of thing that in my experience, at least, you guys are particularly good at. Really, really considering the whole of something and making sure that all the different characteristics of it are being sensed into, and certain things aren't being left out, is, again, in my experience, something that I tend to rely on my female partners and collaborators to do more of. And again, I'll give you another concrete example: hot tub land. So it's big. It's a big, heavy object.
Yeah.
And so placing it and moving it is very non-trivial, like cranes and strong guys with tools. So it did not occur to me at all. And this seems absurd. It did not occur to me at all that you might want to consider what you will be looking at in the hot tub when you're sitting in it, in terms of where you put it. Because ultimately you will be sitting in the hot tub, and your eyes, to the degree which they're open, will be taking in whatever happens to be in front of you. Now, to some extent, I didn't I didn't just sort of completely obliviate that, but I put it in a place that's kind of like a nice spot. But my wife created a mock-up, put it out on the patio, measured the height of where it's going to be, and then just sat on the mock-up and looked, and sat in the mock-up and looked. And I was like, fuck, like this would have been a disaster if you hadn't been stepping in to do that. And there were like 4 or 5 other things like that, which from her point of view was easy and obvious. And from my point of view, were completely not even part of the consideration. So one answer to the question is collaboration, right? This can only be done in collaboration, a space of actually authentic perspectives that don't have an agenda on what the answer is going to be, but have an intention to contemplate what the rightness ultimately really is, like to discover the wholeness in its reality. Anyway, so that's what came up for me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And yes, I would love, we have the holidays and everything. So it's probably sometime after the first of the year having another discussion, because this is, I think this is probably going to give me a ton of stuff to think about for a while and probably rewatch. But thank you. It feels like there's a bunch of, you've given me a lot of language. That's been, I think, a big part of this journey for me, is finding the language to describe things. It's my experience of I don't have the words. And so
I've got a lot of words.
so
I'm happy to give you words for free. You get as many words as you want.
And because I really do look like I look forward to seeing what is emerging as far as this, wisdom tradition that is uniquely American. I mean, I that sounds so strange. Like there's a part of me that's resistant to saying that, but in a sense, like we don't have, it's like we don't have that. We don't have.
No, we don't.
And
that we definitely do not have.
And so what does it look like to have one emerge? Like, what is the experience of participating in the emergence of something like that? And
these are beautiful questions.
Yeah. So if I know that you guys you had put out sometime in like January or February of something more conversations about the religion that is not a religion, the wisdom tradition. I would be deeply interested in however that unfolds.
Okay. Very nice.
That's even if I'm just a fly on the wall for conversations, it gives me lots of opportunity for learning. So.
Beautiful. Well, I really appreciated this. Thank you for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.